Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Adele Newton. I am the Executive Director of CSCAN InfoCan, and this is the February session of our podium series. Today we have Professor Audrey Girard, who is in the School of Information Technology at Carleton University. Audrey won this year, was one of the winners of this year's Outstanding Young Researcher Awards, actually for 2019. We have actually changed the name of that. It's now an Early Career Award, but this is the award that Audrey won. And Audrey is going to give us her presentation on her research. So Audrey, without further ado, I'm going to pass it along to you.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Audrey Girard, and I'm an associate professor in the School of Information Technology at Carleton. I'm very thankful to have this opportunity to talk about my research and my career path with you today through this CSCAN webinar. So winning the Outstanding Young Researcher Award, as it was named at the time, made my 8-year-old laugh at the idea that I'm young. So I'm very much looking forward to the new change in the award name. But jokes aside, this early career recognition was really important. It made me think about who influenced my career. And so I want to talk about how my supervisors, how my students, how my collaborators have influenced the research that I do today. I want to discuss how I pick ideas that pique my interest and that allow me to work with the people I like in an area that I love. So as I put this talk together, I highlighted two main goals, two main things I wanted to share with you. First, I'll be honest, I don't have a detailed, extensive research plan. I share this because I want to reassure early career researchers that it's okay not to know exactly what's coming. We don't always. We're just, and so it's okay to change your plan as you go. Mid-career researchers, and I'm assuming more senior researchers too, may seem like they know what they're doing, but that's not always the case. We're just collectively good at pretending we know what we're doing. I also want to highlight how I get inspired by people, by discussions with people I like, and by the ideas that they bring. So surrounding yourself with people who are different than you is helpful. I have an interdisciplinary research lab, and my students bring different perspectives we integrate in our research. I haven't had a lot of sort of traditional computer scientists in my lab so far. I've had people that had undergrads in industrial design, in anthropology, in English, in interactive multimedia and design. And everybody brings in their different perspectives and skills and collectively make us sort of a better research lab. And so learning and listening to each other, to ideas, is really sort of making better research altogether. And of course, I'll share some cool human-computer interaction research from my students in this talk. So let's start with a bit of background and timeline to give you some context about me. I did my undergraduate degree at École Polytechnique de Montréal. So I was in the very first promotion of the newly created Génie Logiciel program, so software engineering program. And I liked studying. So by the end of the program, I knew I liked interfaces and human-computer interaction, even though I didn't quite know what research in this meant. But I looked for graduate schools, and I ended up at Tufts University, where I did my master's and my PhD. And then I spent a year as a postdoc at Queen's before finding my current position at Carleton. So through the talk, I want to highlight the people who influenced me career-wise, starting with my two supervisors. So my PhD supervisor is Rob Jacob, and my postdoc supervisor is Will Vertigal. And really, I add my colleagues and collaborators and students for the last 15 years. And you have this huge collection of people that I've enjoyed working with. And so my HCI research adventure starts at Tufts University. I wanted to go to grad school outside of my hometown of Montreal. The story of how I ended up applying to this specific university that I didn't know anything about, but it includes seeing a sign on the Highway 95 when I went to Cape Cod. Obviously, I looked up the program at all, but I'm sticking to this funny story of how I ended up at Tufts. Tufts was a small university, and there was essentially one person doing HCI there. And I had the chance to work with Rob Jacob as my supervisor. I didn't know him beforehand, and I lucked out because he was really knowledgeable about HCI, how academia worked. He shared generously the process of publishing and what goes on behind closed doors in the organization of the conference, for example. So it's something I've always appreciated, and I try to share with my own students, kind of how it really works and what these things really mean. I didn't know what research topic I wanted to do, and I had the chance to join Tufts at the same time as two other fantastic grad students, Erin Solovey and Leanne Hirschfield. And with them, through an idea from Leanne, we started a new research project in the lab, which focused on passive brain-computer interfaces, and that became the topic of my PhD. We used functional near-infrared spectroscopy as our brain measurement. This measures blood oxygenation in the brain. And we chose this one not because it was the most accessible one, I think EEG still is, but because there were FNIRS experts at Tufts. And so we tried to investigate how we could use this signal passively, meaning in addition to the way people use computers. Specifically, I wanted to look at whether we could distinguish workload levels, how hard someone is working to adapt the interface. So if they're working just fine, things are going well, then we leave everything as is. But if they're overwhelmed, perhaps we can reduce the level of detail on the screen so that they can focus on their task at hand, or perhaps pause notifications and distractions. And on the other hand, if you're bored and underworking, then perhaps we can give more details and make the task more engaging. So this research project involved some signal processing, some machine learning, some user interface design, and lots of experiments to test out our theories. So in addition, while I was at Tufts, with Dr. Jacob and the other HCI students in the lab, we started to think about what could be the next generation of user interfaces. Remember that this was 2005 and before the iPhone. And so really before a lot of the mainstream technologies that we have today. And yet many new fields were starting to come out of their shell, especially in the research domain. So ubiquitous computing, tangible user interaction, virtual and augmented reality, handheld mobile computing, to name a few. So we proposed the concept of reality-based interactions as a unified view of a large subset of emerging interaction styles at the time. So through 4 themes: naive physics, body awareness and skills, environment awareness and skills, and social awareness and skills, the RBI framework provided a lens to analyze, compare alternative designs, and evaluate design trade-offs. So the paper proposed implications for design, mainly addressing how simply mimicking reality alone is not sufficient. Researchers must make trade-offs, so giving up some reality in order to get other desired qualities such as efficiency, expressive power, versatility, ergonomics, accessibility, practicality. And we wanted these trade-offs to be made explicitly. So if you're in VR, for example, and you could walk to your destination, and that would be like you do in reality, but you could give yourself some Superman powers and be able to jump or to fly very fast to the destination. And so that's the trade-off between reality and efficiency. And this framework was very well accepted by the research community. So a few years later, almost 10, as the RBI paper was coming towards its 10th anniversary, and it kept on being regularly cited, I got curious as to the citation patterns. I have a Google Scholar alert on my own publications, so I get a notification when people cite my work, and I highly suggest it once you've published a paper or two, because it's really cool to see who sort of is using your work in their own work. And through a casual conversation at a conference with my colleague and friend Ari Chair, who worked on the original paper, we decided that it could be exciting and interesting to look into this further, to look into the citation pattern. Are they citing RBI as a cursory matter, meaning they're citing it just because somebody asked them to cite it, or just because it's a framework and we're listing lots of framework? Are they actually sort of generating ideas from it, from looking at it and looking at their work through the lens of RBI? So we did a content-based citation analysis, which I knew nothing about before this project, but we created a new citation typology to understand how people were citing our work, and that was really fascinating. We also did a survey of HCI educators, investigating how they talk about frameworks in their courses. Are they presenting them? Which ones are they presenting? And are their students actually using the frameworks to think about their own projects? And what this whole study revealed is that RBI is used directly by contemporary authors to justify arguments and significant changes to generate new designs. Of course, there are cursory citations, but overall, we think people are using the work even sort of many years after it. So that was really encouraging. So we call the work the reality of reality-based interaction. It's always nice to make nice puns in HCI papers. And perhaps in 10 years, we'll look at it again to see if it's died down. So after graduating from Tufts, I knew I wanted to come back to Canada, and I'm certainly happy to not have been there given the last 4 years. This was mainly to be closer to family, let's be honest. And honestly, I needed a break from brain computer interfaces too. So I wanted to continue to do really cool research. And then I found a postdoc ad by Roll Vertical at Queen's. He was doing interesting HCI research and novel interactions, specifically organic user interfaces, which were somewhat close to the RBI framework I just mentioned. Nothing to do with BCI, but the postdoc was to work on a project on flexible display user interface design. I knew nothing of flexible displays, but I applied anyways. I knew I could do HCI research with novel inputs. Brain is certainly one of those. And it was in a location I wanted to be in. So I met Roll and I went for it. So it was a bit serendipitous in this way of, let's just try it out. So postdoc, it's not sort of a commitment for a 20-year research direction. And within less than 2 months, with the help of a visiting PhD student, we created Paperphone. Paperphone was the first functional, flexible phone. And I have a little video. I have lots of videos in this presentation to show you about Paperphone.
Flexible displays are extremely lightweight, very thin, and allow for interaction styles that resemble those used with paper documents. Bending the display as a form of input is a new and promising affordance of flexible displays. We conducted a participatory design study to evaluate the use of bend gestures on a real functioning flexible display. The display we used is a flexible version of e-ink. A flexible printed circuit with resistive bend sensors is used to detect the bending of the display. The display is bent to a shape selected by the user. This shape is recorded in the software. When this shape is repeated, it triggers an action on the device. Participants generated bend gestures and use these gestures to navigate through a menu of contacts, make a call, select songs, and perform a variety of other actions with Paperphone.
So I found this research about interactions on flexible displays interesting and full of potential. So when I started at Carleton, just under a year later, I decided to pursue it. So before I discuss my Carleton research projects further, I want to discuss an interesting exercise I did late summer 2019. I had a new postdoc at the time, Serendipity, who is now a faculty member at Queen's. So it's kind of a circle continues. After a few weeks in the lab, enough time for her to get a handle on who we were, the research we were doing, but while she still had fresh eyes, she asked for a meeting so we could discuss my vision for the lab. This turned into a 4-hour meeting in my office, explaining how all the past research fits in together, drawing timelines of projects, discussing themes. It was so exciting and fascinating to put paper ideas, to put to paper ideas that were floating in my head that hadn't been organized yet. So you can see kind of our setting. Here you can briefly see projects and papers that are listed in red, collaborations in green, so collaboration with people that are not my students. You can see just broader themes that are in orange and lots of arrows of how one project flows into another, either through knowledge, through skills. Sometimes it's version 2, sometimes it's something that we took from one project in terms of how to build a prototype. And really with this, it became clear how research projects in my lab are not isolated instances. They're not sort of student A does their project and then nobody picks it up again. Sometimes there's a year that passes, but if a project has more potential, I like other students to pick it up. And we have this common knowledge in the lab that is passed on that I find really interesting. So in this one, I try to draw my grants to try to see how they fit time-wise with the projects. So the timelines of the grants are in orange, and how they relate to themes is in blue. And it was such a great experience. I highly recommend doing this when an experienced researcher joins your lab. It really helps to kind of like clarify and organize some of your ideas. This also led us to write a day in the life article for the ACM Interactions magazine. It was published mid-2020, so I think it was the beginning of the pandemic, might have gone unseen a little bit, but it led us to answer some questions about the culture of the lab, which was really interesting. We took some really nice lab pictures, which you can see here, both of sort of my students working, their environments. It was also useful to take some slightly cheesy pictures of us sitting around on the grass, having a meeting. It looks like a sort of a generic photo, but we actually do a few times a year in the summer sit outside next to the Rideau River. We don't always look that pretty doing it though, but we did for the photo. It also allowed us to tell the world how much homemade baked food people bring in the lab. They're small in the slide, but there's banana bread with sort of chocolate chips spelling the lab's acronym, Creative Interactions Lab, CIL. Cookies with CIL logo, cookie cutter. There's scones. There's some traditional sort of food that everybody brings from their own culture. So if they know how to bake at all, how to make food at all, I highly encourage students to bring some confectionaries. That's the one thing I miss the most about being home is I can't bring any food that I make to them and vice versa. Okay, so back to the research. The question through paper phone and sort of afterwards was, can flexible displays improve how we interact with our devices? And that is a really good question, but really a more interesting one is, can deformable interactions improve how we interact with our devices? It opens up the room for other form factors beyond things that are flat and beyond things that have a flexible display. So deformable interaction, what does that mean? Well, it means that we can change the shape of the device to interact with it. So here's an example of bend gestures, where we physically manipulate the display to form a curvature for the purpose of triggering a software action. So in this case, we have a bendable sleeve around a regular phone. We put some sensors in this bendable sleeve and we use it to manipulate the little piece of paper that is on the screen to be able to crumple it, to fold it. It's called Paper Ninja, in order to do different actions and get it through the maze. Gestures can be one-handed or two-handed. So the previous example was two-handed. This one is one-handed. And this was an important sort of question to ask, the one-handed one, because that's how we hold most of our phones right now. So could we manipulate it? And the answer is yes, to a certain extent, though the language, the gesture language is a lot more limited in that case, unsurprisingly. So I'll talk a lot of sort of about a few of our projects. I've grouped them by either application or by specialized users, because we tend to design for a specific reason. So I'll start with games. This is Bendy. And now that I've given you some context for the work, I want to talk about how we used it to play a game. So Bendy precedes the Paper Ninja video I just showed you. This is actually the work of my very first master student, Jessica Lowe. And so we decided to explore mobile games because they're designed to be short, simple, competitive, engaging, and they make it makes them sort of one of the most used mobile application. And games have a variety of inputs and only require a small, many only require a small set or simple commands. And so that's what we decided to explore. So we broke down the different gestures of a few small games: jumping, shooting, rotating, moving up and down, left and right, and ask people to create gestures to make this work. And then we tested with actual 6 actual short games. And we use a projected display in this case to give the context, but but participants could manipulate the entire display. So what's interesting about this project, beyond kind of the results that we got, is that Jessica Lowe was an industrial designer that was doing a master's of human-computer interaction. And she brought her ID, industrial design background with her, obviously, including the techniques to build comfortable prototypes using silicone. So silicone was not something I had used before. And really, this shows that's a great example of how my team is multidisciplinary. Very few have a traditional background or a CS background like me. It took quite a few years. I'm wondering if, I think 2 of my current students have a CS background, but I think they might be the first. There's been other technology related backgrounds, but not sort of more traditional ones. And it's an example of how everybody brings in their expertise and skills, and we build on this as a group. We still use her silicone prototyping method today. You'll see many prototypes with silicone in them in the rest of the talk. So here's a kind of an overview of her process. So in that case, so she designed the circuit design, and then we etched it on to create a flexible circuit. Soldered the sensors, poured silicone over it, and then you get this really neat and comfortable prototype to manipulate. After our first project with games, my student Peyton came along, and he was also interested in it. And so he created Bentroller. So we created a game controller that will use Ben specifically. And we took the idea of the NES very early game controller, cut it in half, and then added this flexible bridge in between. This one was made of foam, and he iterated a lot with just various foam prototypes without even any sensors in them to see what was comfortable in terms of size, in terms of bendability. So this is what he came up with. There's the 2 bend sensors, which you can kind of see peeking in the bottom as he bends the controller. Magnitude here is not representative of how much it needs to be bent. It makes for a nice video though. So you can bend it up and down and twist it left and right. And with it, tested 3 arcade games with discrete gestures to control different gesture schemes. So tested how users could use bend gestures to navigate or to do actions like jumping or punching. And punching and punch out worked out really well. The gesture was quite smooth. Another domain that I've explored is accessibility. And I think it's a very promising one. And I've only sort of started in it, and I see a lot of my current research and future research will definitely be in this area. So my work in the domain of accessibility started 5 or 6 years ago when we started thinking how the tangibility of the gestures with our prototype require a certain dexterity. So we talked to various stakeholders, from physical therapists to people who are blind, to see how our ideas, if our ideas made sense, whether it would be worth investigating, whether deformation could be an input for those specialized users. The answer, sort of the initial discussion, was positive, and so we have a few projects that I'll present. So because our interactions is tangible, is very tactile, and it can be performed without looking at the display, we thought it could be of interest for visually impaired and blind users. And so our first project was Matt Ernst, and we explored using deformation as an input to control a screen reader, like VoiceOver. So VoiceOver is the application that's on the iOS. Most blind users use iOS, so it's the most used application in this case. And it reads everything that's on the screen, and you can touch with various touch patterns to go to the next item, to go down a list, to go to the next heading, to change the settings. There's quite a complex set of applications. And so we tested our prototype and interaction with blind users. So this is an example. So this is an example of an interaction that one of our blind participants had during an experiment. They could manipulate the 2 corners. They could fold the kind of the top part in half, just like you see in this picture. And then you can kind of squeeze it the bottom half. It was not as fast as these users are with VoiceOver. It's incredible how how experts they are at manipulating. That was not, so it wasn't unexpected that your application was not as fast, but they saw a lot of potential in it, and perhaps with people that are not expert yet, and as they're learning, this could be an alternative means of interacting with VoiceOver. The one thing that they really liked, and I think that was really unique about this prototype that we didn't have before, is the presence of grooves. So this is an idea that Matt had, that he implemented, and it was really great, and you'll see how we used it in further prototypes. By grooves, I mean the indentations that you can see on the prototype. So there's a kind of like a house-like groove, and then there's a vertical line. And these grooves really help the user know where they're supposed to bend, the size of the bend, the size of the surface of the bend they need to do. And it creates a really nice a gesture that's easier to do. And so this was a really lovely improvement on our prototypes. And you can see here, that's kind of a follow-up prototype a few years later from Daniela Briotto Festino that reuse those grooves. You can also see the previous and the current prototypes use silicone, and because there's the tactile result is so interesting. So this is Bendy Pass, and Bendy Pass is built on the work from Sara Massoud, who came up with, so alongside Sonia Chiasson and myself, we came up with the idea of using bend gestures to create a password. So what do I mean by this? Well, if you have a device that you can input bend gestures, if you input a series of them, that could become your password. So instead of 1, 2, 3, 4, it could be the top corner down, the bottom corner up, the two corners up, and then fold the device in half. And that series of 4 gestures can become your bend password. This was, we did a study a few years earlier on bend passwords with general public, and it was great to see that people could create a bend password, could remember it immediately after creating it, but also could remember it a week later. We also had done a shoulder surfing study, an initial one, and people did not have the mental models to steal the bend passwords, and so none of them, even with full access and note taking, were not able to copy them. So that gave us sort of good results. And so here, Daniela sort of took Matt's Typeflex ideas and prototypes with blind users and Sana's password, and combined them to study password authentication with people with vision impairments. She built a lot of different prototypes, starting from Matt, and then it started vertical and then turned horizontal, and experimented a lot with the placements of the grooves, as well as the type of silicone that she used. The end result, the bottom right, is 2-colored because the pale one, the opaque one, is harder, and so it's less bendable, less flexible, while the sort of more dark brown one that's slightly transparent is a lot more flexible. So the flexible one enables better bend gestures, and people are not trying to bend where they're not supposed to. So I have another video to explain it.
People with vision impairment consider being the least secure authentication method because of the risk of shoulder surfing attacks when using smartphones to access their features. We developed a new flexible prototype called Bendy Pass to evaluate a recently proposed authentication method called Bendy Passwords. Bendy Pass has the size of an iPhone Touch, and it's made of silicone. Bendy Pass has 5 sensors to recognize information, and it provides haptic and audio feedback. Here's an example of a password being created in Bendy Pass. We ran a user study with 16 vision impaired participants to compare bend passwords. In the first session, participants created both a bend password of Bendy Pass and a new on a keypad smartphone app. A week later, participants used their passwords to unlock the devices. We found that bend passwords were as easy to create and to memorize as keys, and were also considered as secure against shoulder surfing attacks as keys. However, bend passwords were significantly faster to render than keys. Bend passwords have the potential to replace keys as the more tactile user authentication method for people with vision impairment.
Great. So that was Bendy Pass. So on the topic of accessibility, I said at the beginning how my ideas sort of my research is based on serendipity and some random interactions. And so here's another example of a random encounter that really helped to strengthen this new research direction of mine. So in 2016, I took a leadership development workshop at Carleton called Fierce Conversations. And Adrian Chan, a colleague from another department, whom I didn't know at the time, happened to take the workshop with me. And we ended up on the same table. We had such a good discussion during the workshop that he invited me to participate in the Answer Create application he was writing. And so I am now part of the research and education in accessibility, design, and innovation called READY training program. It was funded, and really this has contributed to the training and funding of a number of my grad students in the domain of accessibility. It created connections with community partners and colleagues. And my research in this field is stronger because of it. I learned a lot through attending the symposiums and the presentations and talking to community partners and hearing lived experiences from various members of our community. And so it's stronger because of this random encounter. And this is a good occasion to mention a second Answer Create I'm involved with, which is called CLUE, Collaborative Learning of Usability Experiences. It's not related to accessibility. It's all about usability, user interface, and user experience. So CLUE stems from conversation I had with Anthony Whitehead, who was in my department in my school. And we wrote a grant to further our students' training in usability through industry internships, through seminars and workshops. When Dr. Whitehead passed away in May of 2017, I took this training program over as director. The funding is coming to an end next month, which is bittersweet. It's really given me an unprecedented opportunity to find industry and government collaborators, have conversation about the state of UX and how UX has evolved in the last even just 5 years. It's allowed me to invite speakers. Some I knew, some were friends and collaborators, and some that I didn't, for seminars and workshops. And it's really furthered sort of all of our training in all aspects of UX. And I'm teaching a new class on UX and accessibility next fall, and I'm looking forward to sort of putting it all together in a cohesive way for our students. Okay, so back to my main research. The projects I presented to you earlier all have similar characteristics. They're rectangular, flat, mobile devices. And so that's very typical of mobile, obviously. But beyond flat and rectangular displays, what other form factors are worth exploring? So a great example of thinking outside of the box for research is Flex Stylus. So in this project, my student, Nick Fellion, was fiddling away with the straw and ended up creating a new flexible stylus from it. And he then used clay to try to further his prototypes, and then designed this pen that can be bent as a means of dynamic input while the user moves it on the surface. And I fully credit Nick for this idea. This is an example of a student brainstorming and bringing new ideas to the table, which I love and I always welcome. After years of working on sort of a 2D plane with mobile devices, this was a small change in research direction. It might seem very simple, and it is in a way, but it also requires a large change in our fabrication techniques, because the bend sensor we had been using were flat. And you can't do a 3D rotation when you have a flat sensor. And so he ended up designing his own optical bend sensor, which was really new to us. And it's also another example of how I use collaborations, and I work with colleagues from other universities. So Nick wanted to do a MyTax research internship. And so I put him in touch with my colleague, Thomas Pietzak from the University of Lille. And I didn't know Thomas very well. I think we had sort of briefly talked at a conference or two, but but Nick wanted to go to France, and so he went there. We looped in Tama to this project, and sort of now Tama is a close collaborator, and we've worked on a number of projects since together. And so it kind of was a great serendipitous occasion, just sort of randomly through other people's interests, sort of I find collaborators that I like to work with. So let me talk to you about Flex Stylus now. So Flex Stylus is a normal stylus, so you can do sort of X, Y, but also it's you can bend it and change the width of the pen in this application. Can also use it as a menu selector, so you can bend it to do radial menu, and then you can also select in a 2D color wheel, for example, just by bending this interaction. We've done more work on this, but it's not quite published yet, so we can revisit things in a little bit. Okay, so in addition to doing Flex Stylus, we've done a lot of work with my PhD student Lee Jones on wearable e-textiles. And her first work on the topic was wearable bits, scaffolding creativity with a prototyping toolkit for wearable e-textiles. And so she created all of these examples of sort of short, sort of small e-textile sensors, and ran workshops to see whether those small examples, so this small toolkit, could be useful to get people to be more creative and more engaged with wearable prototypes, especially given that, you know, it's not something that they have access to a lot. And so this was published last year at TEI. This was the last conference that one of us ever went to, right before the world ended. And since she's done some really cool work, so this is going to be presented next week at TEI, and she explored a new tool to look at e-textiles as well. This one is a punch sketching. So lots of interesting applications with this this application of hers. And what I find really interesting is that she combined kind of the e-textile aspects, but really went beyond just making soft circuits, which is important and an interesting tool, but looked at how this could be kind of a good alternative tool for people with different dexterous abilities, and looked at, talked to occupational therapist about it. So the last project I want to discuss today is also presented next week, and it's called Soft Speakers, Digital Embroidery for DIY Customizable Fabric Actuators. And this is the main work of Serendipity. The sound is very low, but you can hear it, hopefully. You can truly hear the sound. I think it's not coming up well from the presentation. So as we looked at different applications, we have sort of soft speakers in a toque, and now she did it in a chair. She ran meetings sitting in this chair and listening to us through these soft speakers. And what was interesting is that the rest of her family couldn't hear, and yet she didn't have to put on earbuds. So for this one, she put it in a scarf, which was really unique and creates sort of more inclusive design for speakers for people with head coverings. Again, this is presenting next week at TI, so you get a sneak peek. So can deformable interactions improve how we interact with our devices? I think the answer is yes. It's complementary to touch, enables different types of interactions. It works really well in different situations with different applications and specialized users. And it has a lot of possibilities beyond mobile. Examples of the Stylus and wearables are two that I showed today. Of course, we do sort of there's a lot of research in progress, a lot more accessibility research. There's a lot of really cool projects that are in the pipeline right now in the lab. We're doing a lot more work in wearables, and we like to run a lot of ideation workshops, though this last year has been a little bit more difficult for this. But it's something I think of a strength of the lab, because talking to users and getting them to co-design solutions to their needs is really critical. So coming back to my very first or my very second slide, hopefully you've seen examples of serendipity. I didn't know the research I wanted to do for grad school, and I found brain computer interfaces and really enjoyed it for a while. And then I randomly sort of ended up at Queen's and did research on flexible displays, and that was really fun. And I'm continuing this variations of this now. And sometimes students or collaborators have an interesting idea, and I'm always for it. I'm like, why not? If I'm interested in it, inspiring, then let's go for it. And it's really all about the students and their backgrounds, and having collaborators I enjoy working with. And so thank you. Hopefully you've noticed all the pictures of my students that I put in. This is kind of a snapshot of the current lab. Feel free to reach me if you have more questions, or to go see the videos of our projects. Thank you.
Thank you, Audrey. That was really an interesting talk. And isn't serendipity part of research anyway? So as that works out. If anyone has any questions, you can put it in the Q&A, and I'd be happy to forward them on to Audrey. So we'll wait a few minutes to see. And I want to know where to buy those speakers for the chair and the scarf.
The chair is currently in my daughter's room, and she's been quite enjoying it. But yes, perhaps that can be an industry collaboration to,
That's right.
to make it happen.
Well,
have to talk to Sarah as to what she wants to do too.
Well, for those of us who've been wearing headphones for all our Zoom calls, having something different and more comfortable is certainly an option. Are there any questions? I'm just going to give it another few seconds here to see if anyone has any questions and answers. Otherwise, Audrey, thank you so much for taking the time, and thank you. Oh, we do have a question. Here we go. Oh, it's thank you for a great presentation from Stacy Scott. So there you go.
Thanks, Stacy.
Yes. So thanks to everyone for joining us today. Thank you, Audrey. And this presentation and the slides will be up on the website later this week. And we'll talk to you again soon. Thanks very much.